Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. Hopefully everybody is caffeinated enough from the break. So that was an outstanding first set of sessions. Of course, I made my own word cloud as I was listening. So I got shenanigans, I got AFP non-PG, hinky, got that one, pesky, got that one, juicy, got that one. Okay. So hope you enjoyed the first session as much as I did. If there were an independent CPAP Foundation Hall of Fame, those three folks would definitely be in it for sure. So we're lucky that they took the time to impart their wisdom for best practices. So what's at stake here? And I'm going to give some opening remarks before we delve into it. If you look at everybody's 990s in the space on the charitable foundation side and add it all up, we're over $2 billion in revenue. So that is a lot of money that would go into the patient's pockets in a perfect world. And that, if you add that all up, it's over 1 million patients that are being helped by independent charitable foundations. The space has always been of great regulatory scrutiny, for sure. And in 2016, the Department of Justice decided to put basically the entire industry, manufacturers and foundations, under subpoena. And as a result of that, and as a result of some of the data that was collected, some of the data review caused some corporate integrity agreements and other actions by the federal government. This got the attention, of course, of others after that happened. And as mentioned in the previous panel, current senators have written opinions that the entire independent CPAP space should be shut down. So that would, of course, be of complete and total detriment to the patients. So the stakes are extremely, extremely high. This conference is the perfect venue for this particular panel, because this conference especially focuses on the patient first. And the only person and the only people that are going to be harmed by non-compliance in this space are going to be the patients. So whether you're a foundation, a manufacturer, a pharmacy, a physician, a university, or a general advocate, compliant communication in this space is in the absolute best interest of the patient. So with that, we're going to do some discussing on how to start and maintain compliant communications. So I'm Alan Klein. I'm the Chief Development Officer of HealthWell Foundation. And I will moderate the panel, and I'll let all the panelists go ahead and introduce themselves as well. So.
Good morning. I'm Robert Clark, Managing Member, Clark Law. I've been practicing law for 40 years. Maybe one day I'll get it right here after practicing law.
It's a practice, right?
Yeah. So I've been with HealthWell from the very beginning as their legal counsel. We got their first OIG advisory opinion. We also, in the groundbreaking fashion, got the first advisory opinion for Medicare-only funds. It's been an honor to deal with HealthWell because the cornerstone of their operations is compliance. And they've built their operations around compliance, their success around compliance. And of course, that means following to a T the requirements of their OIG advisory opinion, which is the cornerstone of how each CPAP should operate. But I'm Robert Clark, and I'll pass it on to Erin.
Thanks, Bob. I'm Erin Atkins. It says on the screen up there, former Arent Fox attorney. So I've been at Arent Fox in DC in private practice for eight and a half years, and I'm between gigs at the moment. I'm leaving private practice, and I'm actually going over to the industry side. So being here with you guys is wonderful for many reasons, but one of the main parts of my practice at Arent Fox has been on the patient assistance program side. Got to work with wonderful clients like Cancer Care and PAF and a few others out there in the space. So very happy to be here, share with you what I've learned over these exciting 8.5 years.
I'm Michelle McCourt, the Executive Director for Cancer Care Copayment Assistance Foundation. Cancer Care launched its foundation in 2008, and we received a favorable opinion in 2007, right before we launched. And we have a full compliance program that we put in place that we're very proud of, that we worked with Aaron Fox to do that. And I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
And I'm Fran Costello, President of Operations for PAF. I've been with the organization for 23 years and have been part of and overseeing and jack of all trades for our own copay program since its launch in 2004. We have the second oldest opinion issued. So I think all of us are a bit of trailblazers. We don't have law degrees, but we're kind of pseudo lawyers with all of the compliance that we have to adhere to. But it's just a pleasure to be here today to talk to you because I think it's really important. I think there's a lack of knowledge about how we have to operate and why we do things we do. And we want you to understand.
That's great. Thanks, everybody. So these are 3 foundations. There are others in the audience as well as attending this conference. I encourage all advocates to talk to each and every one of them. They all are trying to do what's in the best interest of the patient and help as many patients as is humanly possible. So we are all trying to do God's work a little bit, but in order to do that, we have to follow a lot of rules. This is the most highly regulated space that I can imagine for a foundation to be in. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what rules we have to follow. So the foundations are bound not just by various laws, including anti-kickback statutes and several others, but also under the terms of their unique OIG advisory opinions. OIG stands for Office of the Inspector General from the Department of Health and Human Services. They set the ground rules for how all the foundations in the space must operate. Each foundation has a unique opinion to them, and all of them, I believe, post their opinions on their website. So if you're interested and want to read them, they are all there for public view. So I thought we'd start there and kind of go over some of the idiosyncrasies of what a typical OIG opinion says, how that governs compliant communication between our types of organizations and other stakeholders in the space, and kind of what that means as far as best practice. So let me take it in reverse order this time. Fran, if you want to kind of go first and kind of go over a little bit about what is idiosyncratic about how you must communicate in your job versus what might be a little bit different if you weren't in this space.
Yeah. So I actually had those years before we had an OIG opinion, and I used to get to do things a little differently. So I think the biggest understanding that we all need to have when we operate under the guidance that the OIG gives is the importance of independence and making sure that anything that you say or do when you're talking with anybody really external, it's not really limited to donors because there's other, stakeholders in the environment like hubs, specialty pharmacies, kind of other players, if you will, that you have to be really mindful about what you talk to them about. You can't be influenced. They can't ask you to, hey, could you start a XYZ fund? Well, no. Not if you're asking me to do that. I cannot do that. Mm-hmm. We've been called on to, and we've told the OIG that we know what patients need and that we know how to identify what patients need. And therefore, we're the ones that are responsible for identifying those funds that we feel there's a demonstrated need for. And we do that work on our own. We set the parameters of the funds. All of us have our boards involved in that process. And then we go fundraise, and I think that's really, really important. And then when it gets to the fundraising side, I mentioned this in the last panel, like we have to tell them things like, yeah, you can't promote that you gave this money to us. You can't let your sales teams tell anybody that you gave money to any of us. We can't give you any data or very limited data. And we know that those kinds of folks are used to lots of data and information. So we really can't draw a return on investment for you because that's like the biggest no-no in all of this. So I think that's kind of highlights. There's lots of other finer points that we have to pay attention to, but it's just a really awkward relationship sometimes, but it can also be really productive as long as everybody understands the rules of the road.
That's great, Fran. Michelle?
Well, Fran covered a lot, and our OIG opinions are different, but they are very similar as far as following the guidance that's set forth, through the HHS and the OIG. So, our communication with donors is very limited as far as what we will provide to them information after they make a donation. We can provide them with an overview of our program prior to any kind of a donation, just so that they are familiar with who we are, what we do. I think that's very important. And when we have the opportunity to do that, I think it works out better so that they have a full understanding of what we do. But we do have to keep everybody in line, if you will, and compliant. And Fran's exactly right. Sometimes you'll get somebody, or even, hey, I heard that, I know you deal with cancer. We have a rare cancer, they might want us to create a program or suggest that we create a program. It's like, okay, we can't create a program for you. What we would do is we identify these gaps, we identify these needs. We know patients across the board have these needs. So we will work with our board to define a program and define it compliantly based on what the patients need, and making sure that it includes more than one medication by more than one manufacturer, and define it broadly so that we're not salami slicing it so that it whittles down to just their drug. So there is some education, and I think that's why it's important, is to be able to have that opportunity to provide the education of what we do and why we do it.
Erin?
So from the legal perspective, so of course you've got two lawyers up here, so we have to talk a little bit about the weeds, but I think it's always important to kind of take a little step back when we get into these conversations to understand why this space is so unique. The individual that made the comment earlier about why can't we just all have the Common App and use something like that? That's a great idea. However, it's just really important to keep in mind that the healthcare industry is unlike any other industry out there. It is one of the most highly regulated industries in the United States. So the great ideas and the common best practices that might apply to, the construction industry or the retail sales industry, those really common sense ideas don't necessarily apply to healthcare because we are so highly regulated. So that's sometimes I find that with clients that are coming into this space from a different background, a different field of work, it's really difficult for them to wrap their heads around that. So taking some time to educate everyone, I think, is always a good idea. And fundamentally, the issue that we're trying to avoid, both manufacturers and independent charities, is violating what's known as the anti-kickback statute. Bob and I could talk for 6 hours about the anti-kickback statute, and you'd all be asleep very quickly. But believe us when we say that is the fundamental core of why this industry is so highly regulated. There is, first of all, the anti-kickback statute is a criminal statute. I always like to remind my clients that it is a criminal statute. People can and have gone to jail for its violation. And the essence of the kickback statute says that it is a crime to offer or receive. So it's not just the person, this is a very exaggerated example, but, handing the bag of money to the doctor, or the doctor saying, hey, I would like, $15,000 would make my day a lot better. Either one of those actions can be a violation of the anti-kickback statute. So what does this have to do with your industry? Well, at the core of the kickback statute is this concept of remuneration. You're giving something of value, or you're asking for something of value with the intent to affect referrals of business, of prescriptions, of claims that ultimately get processed or paid by a federal healthcare program. That's a lot of words, and it's a big concept, but that's what we're concerned about. So when you see the commercials on every single night for the copay coupons for like the brand drugs, and it says, pay as little as $0 for your copay, and then it does like the fast talking like they used to do at the car into the car commercials, can't be used can only be used by commercially insured patients. It can't be used by Medicare or Medicaid. That's where this is getting to, because copay assistance is something of value. It's something of tremendous value, right? So that's a very long-winded way of saying, just keep that in mind as to when we get frustrated as to all of the rules that we have to follow and all the dead ends that we feel like we run into. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's to keep everyone from violating the anti-kickback statute, which is a good thing. So just that's one thing I'd have to say when it comes to, just overall thinking about this industry in general. And I understand the frustration. I have, I help clients with this all the time. I get it. But at the end of the day, we're really just trying to keep ourselves on the right side of the law.
Absolutely. And later today, there's going to be a session, Ask the Department of Justice, and you will get a unwanted or thorough explanation of the anti-kickback statute and the False Claims Act and how those laws affect this industry. So getting back to what Aaron and the others have said, the OIG advisory opinion is structured in such a way to give an organization guideposts as to what they can or cannot do in many respects, including communications, in order to avoid liability under the anti-kickback statute and the False Claims Act. If you comply with your OIG advisory opinion, and if you haven't read one, insofar as this industry is concerned, I highly recommend that you pull one off the internet. They're all public, and read it, and you'll see exactly what we're talking about. But the OIG advisory opinion insulates you from liability if you comply, and it gives thorough explanations of what you can and cannot say, what a CPAP can say to donors, what donors can say to CPAPs, what both of those organizations or industries can say to the public. It's full of information on what can be communicated and not communicated with respect to funds, patients, amounts, solicitations, all that kind of stuff. So the first point of reference in a communication process is, what does the OIG advisory opinion say? And failure to follow those guideposts and prohibitions has led to many settlements in the industry, both on the pharmaceutical side and on the CPAP side, all of which are again public. So it's utmost importance that you follow those guidelines, and that within the organization, within the CPAP, there are a limited number of individuals who understand these requirements that are allowed to communicate to donors, and so that you try to avoid peripheral risk.
Absolutely. Can I just make one other addition, especially, so we cannot underestimate the importance of your advisory opinion. There are also two other guidance documents that are really, really important, especially if you're new to this space, or even if you haven't looked at them in a while. It's always great to just kind of refresh, so the OIG did publish some advisory bulletins in the Federal Register. There was one back in 2005, I think, and then the more recent one in 2014. I say recent, 2014 doesn't sound that recent anymore, but that's what we have. Okay, so out there in the industry, we've got three main things. You've got your advisory opinion, and then you've got these two other kind of global guidance documents from the OIG. They're incredibly helpful, but still there are some questions that they don't directly address. And so hopefully you have a great lawyer like Bob on your team that can help you interpret those. But those are really the three main sources that at least I go to whenever I'm advising clients is what has the OIG said in the past in these advisory bulletins, and then what have they told, cancer care they can or can't do in their own opinion.
Yeah, and as a result of those bulletins, CPAPs have had to amend their advisory opinions to sort of roll in the requirements of those bulletins and other guidance in the industry.
Yeah. Just to get really nerdy and then
Yeah.
I don't think you guys are nerdy. So let's talk a little bit, now that we've talked a little bit about the background of OIG opinions, kind of how we've seen them kind of get into some juicy territory when it comes to kind of enforcement. So I personally would put it, if you looked at the enforcement acts that have happened over the course of the last several years, there's a couple different key big categories that I've seen, and then I guess overarching, and I think what the overall audience needs to kind of keep in mind is that independent foundations, such as the folks on the stage and in the audience, independent is the key word. So one of the reasons for actions against either manufacturers or foundations in the space has been when a donor or a potential donor tried to influence the independence of these foundations. And you can use the term quid pro quo, or you can use the term, whatever term you want, but basically it is kind of anathema to what was in their OIG opinion. So in order to safeguard against that, a lot of best practices from foundations have been put into place to maintain the independence of the foundations. So what we can do a little bit now is to share what each individual organization has put into place in order to maintain independence, and also maybe from our legal counsel on the panel, maybe go through some best practice advice and sharing that you would normally have to pay for, but you're going to get for free on this particular panel. Congratulations. So Bob, you got the microphone. So if you had to kind of start from scratch, which you've already done like 50 years ago or whatever that was. Okay, only 40. In order to maintain compliant independence, what are some key bullet points that you would give advice on to a foundation at this point?
Okay. Well, again, the OIG advisory opinion speaks to that, and it speaks to the independence of the organization. Independent board, no representation on the board with respect to pharmaceutical manufacturers or family members or the like. Completely autonomous, independent judgment insofar as operations, governance, not being influenced by donors, independence and judgment on creating funds, which is huge, among other things, because you've seen a lot of settlements and fines and penalties in the industry on a manufacturer influencing with the cooperation of the CPAP and creating funds that are specifically tailored for that particular donor. So maintaining that independence in all operations is of utmost importance, and having that independence rolled into a very fulsome and detailed compliance program and code of conduct that is of utmost importance, not only that you have it, but most importantly, having it and following it. So that's sort of my first tidbits of information.
Yeah, that's great. Aaron?
Agree with everything Bob said. I think I would probably, being who I am, I would pull out the 2005 guidance, and I would read this sentence to my client until they went cross-eyed. The independent charity PAP must not function as a conduit for payments by the pharmaceutical manufacturer to patients, and must not impermissibly influence beneficiaries' drug choices. That's it in a nutshell. It's that concept of you guys being a conduit or an arm or an affiliate of one of your manufacturer donors. That is the most important concept to keep in mind. And I think that if you can really keep that the center of your organization and follow your OIG opinion and seek outside counsel when you need it. That's really the core. I mean, unfortunately, we have seen in the past foundations referring to their donors as their partners or being a vendor of a donor. And Bob and I will give you a masterclass the next hour about donation agreements. So we won't get too far down in that path now, but literally vocabulary matters. You know, when you're trying to establish that I am an independent foundation, and thank you very much, manufacturer, for your generous donation. We're going to run with this now. Thank you very much. You know, thank you. That's kind of where that relationship stops. And we know it's more nuanced than that. I'm just trying to really boil this down. But it's that concept of acting as a conduit that really is what has gotten so, unfortunately, some foundations in hot water. So if you can keep that concept kind of front and center, I think that's some good advice. Then these ladies are going to tell you how you actually do it day to day. Bob and I sit up here.
Yeah, so we do follow our OIG opinion and the guidance that is published. We do try and stay within the four corners of our OIG opinion. And, you know, we can't just do it, you know, we have to show what we're doing and make sure that we're following that. So we do have a compliance program, which, you know, we outline what our best practices are. We're very transparent. We have information on our website about our compliance program. And then we also want to make sure that we're following our OIG opinion. So we do internal audits of our systems, of our staff, to make sure that they're following what we've set forth in our SOPs, or standard operating procedures. And then we have outside, you know, third parties come in and do an audit of our systems. We're also, something I think that's come up in the last few years is that donors will come in and audit us as well to make sure that we are following our OIG opinion. And then also that we are in compliance with the donation agreements or letter of agreements that are put in place.
Yeah, Michelle covered a lot of it. You know, I think for all of us, it should start with reading your opinion. I know that sounds really simple, but especially when somebody joins your organization. And like you said, Aaron, even after it's been a while, go back and refresh yourselves on the terms. I think donors should read them too, so that they understand, you know, their role in interacting with us compliantly. I see wild differences in the level of education on the manufacturer side, and that's just usually just by based on the size of the organization, you know, and their bandwidth to do that training. From a practical standpoint, it is, you know, the four corners. I've heard that a lot, and the spirit and the intent. So Aaron mentioned that there were some areas in the opinion that aren't as explicit as I think some of us would like, you know, so it creates some little gray areas that can be interpreted in different ways. And depending on, you know, your viewpoint, how conservative or how liberal you may be as far as, you know, pushing the envelope legally, those interpretations can play out in operations wildly different. But I do think that we're constantly reminded by our counsel that the OIG had a spirit and an intent in the words that they wrote. And even if they weren't explicit in that intent, we all kind of know what they meant. Even if there's a little bit of wiggle room in there, you shouldn't take it. And neither should your donors. So we too have a compliance program. We've actually had it for many years, pre the whole recert and all that stuff. Because PAF does a lot of other things, and we don't want our copay program to jeopardize the rest of our organization. We have a compliance committee within our organization that sets out the priorities for the year. We do internal audits every quarter. We have external audits as well. We have donor audits. When I retire, I'm going to become an auditor. That's my next career. It's been a lot of audits.
Karma, payback, right?
Yeah, and I'm only doing copay audits. Yeah, I'll know what to ask. But I really think, you know, it's just part of it. and that these are some of the finer things that I wish that people outside of our organizations understood more thoroughly. Like, it's super rare for a charity, and even though we're big charities in the sense of dollars, we're not that big because we give most of that money away, and yet we have a significant administrative burden to not only manage the money in a way that's efficient and effective, but also prove that we're compliant with donation agreements and our OIG opinion. And it's way more than any other nonprofit in any other industry, I would argue, probably has to go through from an audit and compliance perspective. So, but it's worth it. At the end of the day, I think that's the most important message is it's totally worth it, or we wouldn't all do it. I do have 2 colleagues at 2 other national nonprofits that have sought and received OIG opinions, and they've called me and said, should we do this? And I'm like, oh, yeah, don't. It's a lot. It changes the complexion of your organization entirely when you decide to add on or become involved with providing charitable copay assistance.
That's great. And I will certainly be hiring you once you retire to help
do your audit?
Oh, yeah. Fabulous. So
Just want to add one
go ahead,
thing.
please.
It's really important to be able to go home at night and lay your head on the pillow and go to sleep and not worry about, well, I maybe shouldn't have done this and I was pushing the envelope a little bit. It's not worth it. That peace of mind is priceless. And to get yourself in a situation where you want to push the envelope a little bit, and at some point, somebody's going to find out. You're going to have a whistleblower, you're going to have a subpoena, and it's going to overwhelm your operations, not only in terms of the anxiety, but the manpower, the women power, the resources and costs just to respond is quite overwhelming. So it's not worth it.
I was just going to add too that we follow our opinion, we follow our legal counsel. There was another organization out there that did provide copay assistance for a few years that we were all kind of part of a coalition and everything, and they had their OIG opinion rescinded, and that foundation has gone away, and that leaves a lot of patients that they were assisting just floundering to find some other resources. And that's also created some, I think, hesitancy maybe from donors to donate to the foundations as well.
Yeah, I think they also lost their public charity status, if I recall.
They folded, yes.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Can I make one practical suggestion? Since we're talking about what we can and can't talk about.
Yeah.
The educational element is so important. So I think Michelle calls them, I think y'all call them capabilities presentations at Cancer Care. Those are appropriate. If it's your first time speaking to a potential donor, it's completely appropriate to say, hey, we're Cancer Care. Here's what we do. Here are the rules that we have to follow. You're kind of educating the manufacturer in a gentle way, not trying to say you don't know what you're doing, but you can educate them, and you can do that from the beginning, saying, look, this is who we are. We follow our OIG opinion. We follow the OIG guidance. And under those rules, here are all the things that we provide to, our patients, not your patients, our patients. That's completely appropriate. And I think that's one communication tool that you have in your toolbox if you're not using it already to think about developing those that can be really beneficial.
That's very helpful. So let's level set also a little bit for those who may not be aware. The manufacturer industry represents, I think I can safely say, the vast majority of the donations in the space for all of the charitable foundations that are on stage now and are in the audience and attending this conference as well. Although we have at HealthWell, for example, over 70,000 individual donors who give us unrestricted funding. Over the course of time, we've had probably about 60 or so manufacturers who have donated a significantly higher amount of our funding that we're able to program to patients. Those donations actually are called restricted donations because they can actually pick and choose the disease area fund to which they donate, and those funds are then restricted to that disease fund. So I just want to make sure that all of the patient advocates in the space know that it is usually not the foundation choosing how to program all the money that they raise. The donors are allowed to do just that once the fund is compliantly established at that foundation. So that being the case, and given the fact that the donor interaction with the foundation is such a highly sensitive area to discuss from a compliant communication perspective, I thought it would be a good next topic to discuss how we best do that from a best practices perspective in order to maintain compliance, in order to keep our independence as a foundation, and in order to follow our OIG opinion to the letter. And I know we probably, as Krista mentioned in previous panels, it's a little bit nuancy, so everybody can do it a little bit differently, but still do it absolutely in compliance with their OIG opinion. But in the interest of best practice sharing, I thought it would be great to kind of give some ideas as to how the interaction should ideally go. So, Fran, if you want to kind of start off, what are some touch points, having done this for a while, that you've found success with?
Yeah. So the first thing we do is limit the number of people within our organization whose job it is to solicit donations so that they can receive additional training around compliant donor communications, which is above and beyond the compliance training that they get as an employee, that all of our employees get. So that's kind of step one, making sure you have the right people in the position to talk to donors. When we at PAF, when we establish funds, if it's an existing fund, then we have really any fund, we have a responsibility to solicit donations from any and all manufacturers. So we're not going to just single out a manufacturer that we might know or have a contact with or have received donations from before to ask for donations from them. We're going to ask them for donations for those funds, but we're also at the same time going to be asking the same request of all of the donors in that particular therapeutic area. And I want to qualify the same request. At no time would we ask one donor for a certain amount of money and another donor for a different amount of money based on maybe the market share they have or, what we think they might be able to give. While we know all that data is out there and it has relevance to them, what we do is have to demonstrate what the total need is for the year. So that might be $200 million, no kidding, in a single fund. We might go to 10 manufacturers and submit a grant request and then call them up and say, hey guys, I'm sending this to you because this is our estimate of annual need for the XYZ fund. And we need all of you collectively to contribute to this. So really being consistent in the forms that we use. I mean, lordy me, I'm sure y'all do it too. We template out everything that goes to donors. It's all been vetted by council. We don't go rogue and create our own request letters, donation agreements, and we have what we call the naughty letter. If we receive an email in writing from a potential donor or an existing donor asking us to do something or inquiring about information that we can't share or can't do, it is our responsibility in a really professional way to say back to them, I appreciate why you ask these things, and this is my limitation. These are my limitations. So please don't ask me in the future. It says it's much more eloquent than that, but that's, kind of at the end of the day, we do encounter those situations, never maliciously, honestly. Sometimes people tiptoe into questions that they don't realize are off limits because they've not received the proper amount of training. So we have to be ready as a development staff to respond to those situations. So those are some of the things that I think have worked for us. And it's a lot of work. When we get these audits, we have to actually demonstrate that we've done that we have solicited multiple donors, that we've used the consistent grant requests, that we've calculated the patient need for the year and it wasn't fed to us by somebody else. So all of these data points become, evidence, if you will, or documentation within an audit, whether it be our own or our donors.
I mean, I really could just echo everything that Fran said. We do limit who talks to donors. We do educate our staff once a year on, proper communications because they don't fully understand it because they are, again, on the front lines. If they were to get calls from, even media or, sometimes they'll get calls, well, who donate, who's funding you? So we want to make sure that they can answer that question appropriately, that we don't share who our donors are. Again, that there is no, perception of influence from our donors. And, we just really, really make sure that our board is educated, because the board, board members are not, this is not their daily jobs. So we want to make sure that the board is educated, that they fully understand, the communication limitations that we have. We do, again, try and get face to face with them to give them our capabilities, and then to make sure, that the people that we are dealing with do understand and have a good understanding of, how we function and how we operate and how compliant we are. So it is a big challenge and a big task. And we've been doing it for a lot of years, and it does change over the years. I think we can all say that we've seen the people that we talk to change. It used to be in the past that we were dealing with more people in, marketing and access. And that has shifted over the years to now we're only talking to legal counsel on, within the pharmaceutical industry. So, the conversations have definitely changed, which is good. I think that's a good thing. And then I think, too, it's just, we just kind of have to keep at it. We do provide the overall funding, our assessment and our estimate of what the overall fund needs, and those dollar amounts are high. So if you're talking to a big organization, they understand that. When you're talking to a little organization, how can you ask me for that much money? I'm not asking you specifically. This is the overall need, and we need to go out and fundraise to try and, to get at least close, somewhat, relatively close to that amount to be able to keep those funds open. So we do try and make sure that we are hitting everybody. Once a drug is approved for a certain indication, we will then reach out to that organization and introduce who we are, and that we do have a fund and it exists, and we would love if you could make a contribution. And it could be any amount. I mean, they ask us, we do have to provide that overall funding amount, but they have their budgets internally, so they know what they can and what they're able to donate to.
And if you asked for 200 million, I'm sure you wouldn't turn down 250,000 if they made that determination. This is what we can give, Yeah,
there's no minimum. No minimum.
Yeah, and just to jump in really quick, and I think the reason why some of the numbers are so high is because if a fund is properly established and defined, it is very broad in its definition. So if you see a lot of adjectives in a fund name or title, it's probably not defined properly and appropriately. So you can't say moderate to severe X disease for treatment failure patients on X drug. That would be the worst possible definition of any fund on planet Earth. So that's why when you see some of the funds that we're talking about, it is for the treatment of breast cancer. And that encompasses maybe hundreds and hundreds of drugs sometimes. And then that is one of the reasons why the funding need is so great, because so many patients, as intended by the opinions that we all have, will fall into that definition. So, yes.
One quick point about why your communications with donors are kind of limited and restricted. It all goes back to the why. Like I always try to explain, why does this matter? It's the independence, that's the hallmark. The other why is the patient. We don't practice medicine. We're not anyone's doctors. That patient already has their physician. They are going to make the treatment decision that's right for them. We're just here to provide resources, right? So another big why that the OIG is concerned about is steering patients to different drugs. And the theory goes that if I say, well, this fund is funded by these two, huge brand manufacturers who are the only game players in this space, could that influence a patient to say, oh, well, then I guess I need to switch to this treatment just because, this HealthWell fund is funded by these manufacturers. So again, the OIG is also concerned with the patient being at the center of this conversation as well. So that's one reason why that touch point can be so important to keep in mind. The other thing, and I'll look to the ladies to say if correct me if this is just me being the, ivory tower lawyer thinking up all the ideas, but I used to tell, or I still do tell clients, ask anybody for money. Like, you're supposed to solicit from a wide variety, and that doesn't just mean manufacturers. You've got individual donors, like the person whose dad had X disease, and maybe they can just give you, $50. Take it gladly and say thank you. But you've also got other nonprofits out there, like larger nonprofits that are focused on specific disease states. Ask them for a donation, or ask a big hospital center who maybe has a lot of activity in a certain disease space, or even health plans. It doesn't hurt to ask everybody. And is that impractical, or does that ever work? Okay, good.
It absolutely works. We've been the recipient of donations from other charities, which is pretty cool, like in certain disease states. And individuals give. A lot of families give back. Once we help their loved ones, they'll give back to us. It is not the dominant amount of money because those donations are smaller. But absolutely, it is our job to fundraise more broadly than just the manufacturers.
Let me try to touch on several of these points. Fran and Michelle, the points they made, of course, Aaron, are golden. One was sort of, you get a lot of different levels of sophistication from the donors. And some questions or requests that are received are not intended to be nefarious or the like. They just don't know, and you have an obligation to educate. And you also have an obligation to send the nasty gram in a kind way. Naughty letter.
By the way, I say nasty gram because I'm from New Jersey, so that's okay.
I'm from the South.
Yeah, okay. I'm just letting you know it is a nasty gram for me. So,
and I get a reaction. So, can you believe what this guy asked me?
Yeah.
And of course, that's very important. Having the limitation on who has authorization to communicate and the augmented compliance training for those individuals, that's very important. Education, of course, is of utmost importance, and this sort of rolls into the whole scenario about educating the donors. And finally, I know I've not touched on all of them, but soliciting donations from the general public. It can be a long process to get that kind of program going, but it's important from a number of different perspectives, including your 501c3 public support percentage. I mean, again, the amounts of the donations from the donors and the general public are very one-sided, but over time, you get patients that want to contribute. You get legacy donations. And if you keep a program like that going and supported and robust, it'll pay off and get you some, quite a bit of revenue that you would not have otherwise received.
that's all great points. And then the final touch point that we want to do before we take questions is, how do we maintain OIG compliant communication about fund opening and closings at various organizations? For sure, that has been an area where certainly the government has been interested that nobody gets a head start over anybody else, especially a manufacturer, but really anybody in general. So there are various different ways that I guess organizations can do this to maintain both compliance and fairness. So it is kind of tantamount to first come, first serve in that regard. So I can just say from HealthWell's perspective, before I kick it over to everybody else, we press release, and every time we open a fund de novo, we allow people to subscribe to our real-time fund alerts that gives somebody an email or text or both as to when a fund changes in status at HealthWell, going from open to close or closed to open or closed to re-enrolling only patients. But I'm sure there are other secret sauce ways that folks can go about doing this, because this has been an issue cited in other CIAs and DOJ investigations. So any best practice recommendations? We can kind of start from Bob and work our way down.
Okay. Well, coordinating is bad.
Yeah.
You don't want to, well, you see in the OIG advisory opinion, language about coordinating with donors or coordinating this and coordinating that. And the settlements and the CIAs, it turns to conspiracy. So you don't want to be in the business of coordinating the opening and closing of funds with a particular donor. It should be level set. Everybody should know. It should be objective. You don't open and close funds on weekends or after hours to accommodate a particular donor. Those things are bad. And, it costs tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in fines to many organizations to engage in those kinds of activities. It should be objective. It should be level. Everybody should get the same information at the same time and no favorites. But whenever you get to coordinating with a donor, you're going down a path that's not good.
Totally agree. Now, I love the idea of having these the instant, the real time notifications. I mean, granted, we couldn't do that 10 years ago. I mean, people weren't that savvy with their text messages back then, but this is an example of like innovation really helping. That's a great practice. Just to give a further example on what Bob was talking about, unfortunately, we know in the past that some manufacturers would coordinate with the hubs, or some foundations would coordinate with a manufacturer's hub. So what a hub is. If a manufacturer has a brand product, a specialty product, or they utilize these hub organizations to help coordinate the benefits investigation, the prior authorization, like all of that sort of administrative work. Sometimes, and one of the things that a hub can do compliantly is provide, I think Michelle mentioned it last time, like they can provide a list to patients that maybe they can't help. So say the manufacturer puts them through all their criteria. Sorry, we don't have any program that can help you, but here's a list of charitable foundations that might be able to help you. They can do that. They either have to give a list of everybody or do what's called a round robin, where they say, I'm just picking on cancer, like, this first one we're going to send, we'll give them the number for cancer care. Okay, the next one we'll give them the number for LLS. They do it in a fair manner. That's okay. What they can't do is maintain like this list of all these patients that need help, and they know that HealthWell's fund is closed, and then someone says, okay, we're about to open the fund, and the hub all of a sudden floods the foundation with that list of patients. That's bad and should not, and has gotten folks in trouble in the past. So that's another example of what Bob's talking about of coordination. It's not just picking up the phone and saying, hey, Alan, can you take these 3 guys? It can be even more, and no, hey, Alan would not do that. Okay, first of all, just disclaimer, he would not do that. Using as an example, but that's just another kind of example of what we mean by coordination.
So when we open up a fund, we try and make sure that our communications to any outward communication, that it happens all at the same time. Ben, you can, it's a painstaking process, but we make an announcement on our web. So on our website, we would list that the funds are open. At the same time, we also notify anybody that's registered to be notified when the funds reopen. And then we also send out communication to all of the healthcare providers that we have within our system that the fund is now open. And we're very good at it, I have to say. We try and make sure that all these go out at the same time. And then from there, it's first come, first serve.
Ours is very similar. We have a little sign up on our website too, where you can sign up to be notified. We communicate to all of the folks that sign up there. We also communicate to all of the registered users. So that could be a provider, it could be a pharmacy, it could be a patient, it could be whoever's registered to use the portals. They get a notice at the same time. And if it's a new fund, we'll typically do a press release that goes out on the wire. And we've actually established a time. So 1:00, that's our time. We wanted to not disadvantage the West Coast folks. I got beat up a couple times long ago about by the time I wake up and get to work, the fund's closed. Really valid point. So we actually have established a time. It's 1:00. So anytime any PAF fund ever opens is always 1:00 Eastern time, which helps our communications team queue up against that always. It's like we don't have to talk about it, it just happens. So I think that's, really important to be consistent in those fund openings and making sure, as they said, no coordinating, no back behind the scenes like, hey, this is going to open, because as much as we'd like to think that the hubs don't have a list, they do.
Thank you. I know we're running a little bit long, so we're going to take some questions now, but if we run a little bit over, that's okay. I have a great relationship with the next moderator, who is myself. So right down here.
Can I ask if we can wait for the microphone just so we can capture
Yep.
questions on the live?
That's right.
All right. I have 5 questions, but some do kind of overlap. So, when you are getting started in a new space and you do not have your own OIG opinion letter, but you're accessing pre-existing advisory opinions, I'm kind of curious, and I'll just give all my questions and let you answer them. I'm just kind of curious, how much level of safety do you have in that transition period? My second question is, if you're dealing with a particularly rare disease where there's limited care, limited drugs, limited manufacturers, how do you, what's the best practice to safeguard that idea of steering and remuneration when you have a limited pool? My third question is, let's just say you're starting a new fund, whether it's a rare disease state or not, but particularly with a rare disease state where you're just kicking it off and you're soliciting donors, and maybe the first 6 months you only have 1 or 2 donors. Again, how do you safeguard, definitely overlaps that prior question, but how do you safeguard yourself during that birthing process? And then my fourth question is, if donors, if obviously you've already stated donors are allowed to designate where their money goes in terms of funding, what can you do? And this might go to the next session, so you can defer it if you wish, but what's the best rule to protect yourself where that doesn't become cross line into a violation versus an appropriate level of designation? And then my final question is, I know you said it was a definite no to say, hey, your market share is 20%. It's $1 million. It's $100 million space. Give us 20 million. And I'm certainly fine if the final opinion is to just, we need $100 million to everybody. But I'm just curious, academically speaking, what about like a pro rata approach? Like, okay, there's 5 manufacturers of the space. It's $100 million. Why don't you at least point up 20? Would that cross a line? I'm just kind of to give the donors some kind of guidance so that we're not giving them just simply the whole pot. Just a question.
Anybody else have any other questions before I answer? No. No. I mean, I could start backwards and then we can. Yeah, good.
I'll take.
Go ahead.
I can take the first one.
Okay,
the low hanging fruit.
Go for it, man.
The advisory opinion question, and then we can go from there. An advisory opinion is specific and only binding upon the actual recipient. So if you don't have an advisory opinion, technically, legally, you have no protection. Although, and it's recommended and that highly recommended that you get the advisory opinion. It's a process, but the value and the protection that provides is golden. If you don't have an advisory opinion and you basically look at all the advisory opinions in an industry and you basically follow them to a T, in my view, you have some comfort that you're operating in a manner that's compliant, but again, you don't have the legal protection. So that is some comfort, but that is not the level of comfort that I would like if I were an operator.
Yeah, and then one of your other questions was certainly about single drug funds. So if you guys want to kind of go through that, I'm happy to defer it in. Yeah.
So for
Before we move on, though, I just want to add one thing about the OIG opinions. There's a set of certifications that are under the covers underneath our OIG opinions that are not public. So even though there's the guidance is out there and it's public, there may be some finer things that, remember, we tell the OIG what we're wanting to do and they opine on that model. So there may be some information that you don't have from an operations standpoint that you might need.
And the OIG, even though the OIG does publish all of the opinions, they redact them. So, you don't
know if it's
you don't know if it's, you don't know.
I'll tell you, but
Yeah, I mean, like great compliant and transparent organizations like all of these individuals put their OIG opinions on their website. But like Fran said, there's a lot of background information that you just don't have access to. So it's tread very, very, very carefully in that space. On the single drug funds, that does happen from time to time. I think the OIG has said if there is a single drug fund, then you need to cover a wider variety of items. So think about if there's one unique cancer product out there and it's the only one in the space. Well, then you would need to cover other treatments like treatments for side effects, like all the nausea, or other treatments that are associated with that disease state. Because remember, it's not about the drug; it's about the disease state. So it's really would behoove you to have someone on your staff who loves to research these things, loves to get into the weeds about these disease states, to understand like, oh, well, it's not only the chemo or the therapy, but they're going to have these 3 or 4 or 5 additional side effects that they'll need, coverage for. So you can do it, but again, it's an area to be a little cautious in, and these ladies would know even more about how to do that.
Yeah, they covered that in the 2014 SAB. So you can go read the guidance there. And really, they're just looking for dilution of the donation. They just don't want exactly what you're saying would happen, right? All the money would go right back in the pocket of that donor, which is what they're trying to prevent. So it could be including supportive medications as eligible expenses. You could add premium assistance. You could put transportation costs in there. You just need to be covering more than that manufacturer's drug.
That's right.
For that to be compliant.
And a single drug fund is defined, of course, as a fund that has a single FDA approved drug, not just a single drug being used. So it has to be FDA approved. Or a single manufacturer with multiple products. Yep. And then, so those were 2 of the 5 questions. One of them, and I feel like I'm doing my orals for my PhD at this point, so I'm hopefully going to get a certification from you when we're done. Is whether or not to kind of, cleave the ask to, different amounts. I personally think best practice is to just ask for the entirety of it. I say, here's what we need. We appreciate if you can do all or some of it, and we understand completely if you can do none of it. But in order to not do anything that seems untoward, if it's the largest company on planet Earth or the smallest company on planet Earth, this is what we need to keep the fund open. If they ask us how many donors there are, we can certainly share the number of donors, should we so choose to do so. Or if sometimes they ask, are there multiple donors already? Because some people want to have safe harbor whenever they donate. That's okay to share, but I don't personally change the amount of the ask. Yeah.
Is it also okay to say who, we've asked, from 10 companies and we've gotten 4 responses? Is that appropriate too, to say like how wide the net that we're asking is?
So I say it generally, everybody can be a little bit different, but I say we have asked all current and potential donors and kind of just leave it at that. So, yeah.
And given the whole need, it serves another purpose too. Like they need to know. They need to be sensitized to what the patients need, not what we think their share of it is, because that doesn't really matter to us. So that's, it's a little bit of a mind game, if you will, but I think it's really important, even whether they're big or small. They really need to know what the need is.
I mean, the reason that's just there's also that tension of, on my side, it's all shield.
Yeah.
And there's other organizations where, they're trying to do the sword, and I'm trying to, temper. But I'm trying to find sometimes find a happy medium where we're not just, where I'm not just saying no, 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 no all the time, and finding, some kind of compromise that's ethical, of course.
And I think any of us up here would be, if you run into an actual real life example, like email us and ask us, like, what would you do? We understand the dynamics of donors, right? And you do want to say yes. You do want to be accommodating, and you can't always be. But there are ways that you can, like Alan's saying, yes, I've solicited multiple donors. You're not the only one, but you don't have to say it's 10. I'd caution you against that.
And to me, I mean, just thinking out loud, the advisory opinions say that you are not allowed to, a donor, you cannot be able to correlate the amount or frequency of a donation with the amount and frequency of how the funds are used. And to me, this is sort of a little gray area that conversations like that could potentially run afoul of that kind of restriction.
Yeah. Okay. Do we answer like 3 or 4 or 5? Okay. Okay. So we got a passing grade. If we did 3 out of 5, that means we didn't fail. Okay. As a panel. Okay. Anybody else have any questions or any questions in the stratosphere? I want to thank the panel and thank the audience for the participation. This has been a great panel. So thank you very much.